Cry of Fear is easily one of my 3 favorite games, alongside Diablo and Dark Cloud for the PlayStation 2, and ever since I played it back in 2015, it continues to rear itself up in my thoughts whenever I play a horror game. A wave of nostalgia and excitement is taking me over the more I talk about it. Or is that just indigestion? My stomach has been a manner of all fucked up today. In any case, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about Cry of Fear for a while, and I'm going to discuss what the game brings to the table. Needless to say, since this is similar to a review of a specific criteria, including the plot, that a spoiler alert is in order. Although I will try my damnedest to avoid completely spoiling anything that I don't need to specifically talk about. In any case, folks, I give you a silent sit-down Cry of Fear. Before we touch the game, let's do a quick background on the dev team. Cry of Fear is a survival horror first-person shooter game developed by Team Scalar, I believe is the pronunciation there. The game was released on 2012 as a standalone full conversion mod for Half-Life 1 on the Gold Source engine. God damn, now there's a game engine right there now, ain't it? This game is a completely free one to obtain, and you can get it on Steam as well as moddb.com. If the name Team Scalar rang a bell to you by chance, that's because this team has had a history. And an interesting one at that. I really loved looking this shit up, in fact. Team Scalar has 3 projects under their belt, which are Afraid of Monsters, Resident Evil Cold Blood, and of course Cry of Fear. 4 projects if you consider the director's cut of Afraid of Monsters to be a separate entity. This team is clearly very passionate about their projects, and a lot of love gets put into it, which is sadly something we're lacking in gaming lately. One specific man on this team, Stig Sidtangent, is easily one of my favorite fucking voice actors, as he voiced Simon, our lead man. He also has one hell of a history, by the way, and a musical background as well. The other one guy I want to talk about here is the dev behind it all, of course, Rumpel, who made Afraid of Monsters entirely on his own at the age of fucking 12. The guy is a horror genius. He's also a musician as well, in fact. Rumpel has made the OST for Cry of Fear with the help of BXM Music and Mutta Sheep, I believe is what that is. Anyway, he's had an impressive track record on other games as well. He's worked on things like Battlefield 3 and 4 in programming, engineering, and quality assurance. But as much as I respect the mod team, let's talk about the game now, shall we? Cry of Fear starts off in what I presume to be a Swedish city. The ambiance of your first scene sets in, and you eventually switch over to Simon, our lovely protagonist. He notices a man crawling across the ground asking for his help, and as Simon rushes over to help the man, he is struck by a fucking car from out of left field. A series of small flashing scenes and a foreshadow happen, and then the game begins in a typical... what I'm going to say can only be described as a Rumpel-style fashion. The man likes to make surreal environments where everything is black with either lines or assets drawn over them. It's like Sketchbook and the RPG horror Eve. Anyway, the game transitions through these dreamlike surreal areas and the more realistic city ones and everything the fuck else in between quite a few times throughout the game. It bears mentioning that there is a pretty well done reasoning as to why the game is so surreal. It's a psychological horror, baby, so shut up, take your seat next to Murphy Pendleton and Pyramid Head, and buckle up while Uncle Silent reads you a bedtime story that lulls you into insanity. It's gonna be a bumpy ride, kids. So this game will do a form of "and then I woke up" for an ending scenario. However, this way of conclusion is one of the only times that I was content with it. Depending on 2 specific choices throughout the game, it gives you one of 4 particular endings. We'll talk more about that later. The entire game was actually an interpretation of Simon's therapy. The game is actually Simon traversing a book that represents him combating his inner demons. The Carcass boss, for example, represents whether or not Simon came to terms with Sophie's rejection after he confessed his love to her. It represents his grief towards her, therefore killing it will put him at peace, whereas running away entirely lets that shit eat away at him, and that's no bueno. You gotta move on, lad! The other game changer is whether or not you give Dr. Purnell the gun, which represents his trust in his doctor. Seeing how Dr. Purnell is the one that suggested you to write the book in the first place, and that meds alone will not help, it would mean that giving him the gun is good. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, unlike in real life, giving a sketchy motherfucker a loaded .45 ACP handgun is a good thing. The fucker still shoots you in the foot with it, but, you know, at least that's accurate. All in all, I think the plot ties in really well on a gameplay perspective as well, because it doesn't particularly tie you down to any specific formula that makes sense with the narrative. Most horror games with the whole insanity cliche usually make no sense, and that you get to the end and your payoff is, oh well, he was insane so the game meant nothing, here's some dialogue. And that's just not okay with me. The Cry of Fear actually has a reasoning for it to be there, and you're actually directly influencing Simon's fate. And ultimately, you, the player, are responsible for choosing whether or not he comes to peace with his reality. Or, you can fuck up and make Simon kill himself, you fucking animal. There was always something interesting about this game, something that really spoke to me, almost as if I resonated with it. Which is really fucking weird because I don't have any history of mental disorders aside from ADHD and a minor amount of self-diagnosed OCD, so frankly I never understood why the game made me feel so at home. This was a question I pondered for a long time before working on this video, and now that I thought about it, I know exactly what it is I like, which would be the ambiance and the environments. Now, I'm a city boy for those of you who don't know, so I like my buildings and urban environments. You know what I don't like though? All the fucking people. There's just something alluring to me about exploring big empty buildings in video games that I like. And I mentioned this in my Underhell playthrough. Cry of Fear gives you exactly this, a big ass empty city, with the exception of about 500 monsters that want to rip off your face and use it as a cup. The feeling of being all alone and fighting monster after monster after monster, it almost makes you feel like you're the protagonist in a way, doesn't it? At the beginning of the game, Simon describes himself as feeling alone his whole life. Combine that with the narrative of Simon writing a book about his depression and such, and you have the perfect tie-in of the game being metaphorical of Simon literally fighting his depression and all of the ugly shit inside of his head. See, you now empathize with Simon, even if you haven't ever dealt with his condition, and that's pretty goddamn impressive. Beyond the fitting environments and scenes, the game itself is actually pretty impressive as well. The environment is pretty limiting, only allowing for 6 slots of space, or 3 at a certain point in the game that I despised. Be noted, by the way, that a slot is taken up for every gun, key, flare, or morphine syringe for healing, although you can stack syringes and flares on top of 1 slot, I think to a maximum of 5. This shit gets tricky on your second playthrough when you have to deliver a fucking package for half the game, so inventory management is essential. Items can be dropped and then picked up at any point later on, though I'm pretty sure they disappear on a chapter change. You can also dual-wield items in Cry of Fear. You can use your knife and a light sword, 2 one-handed guns, a gun and a knife and a billy bat. I mean, fuck it, the world is your oyster, baby. I mean, shit, if you wield a knife by itself, you can even choose if you want to ice pick that bitch or Resident Evil 5 style hold it. The attention to detail is surprising. The controls are pretty solid as well. They aren't perfect, but it's pretty solid. I'm not sure how much of this you can attribute to it being a Half-Life 1 mod, though. There's crouch jumping, double tapping movement keys to dodge, aim down sights, pistol flashlights, and hell, the M4 in the game can actually change fire modes. The level of detail in the gunplay is pretty good. Apparently the dev actually went to a firing range and replicated the kick of each gun he included in the game to be as realistic as he could. The performance in this game could be a little better, honestly, but it could also just be my system. The game doesn't run awful, but I notice it's pretty variable sometimes. The frames can sometimes just tank when you look in the right spots as well, and while the controls are pretty tight, the game can feel really clunky at times. I'm unsure if this was done intentionally or not, but it bears mentioning. Now, in terms of the content itself, Cry of Fear has apparently about 8 hours of gameplay, I think the wiki was saying. Anyway, there's a total of 7 or 8 chapters in the game depending on your choices, and throughout all that game you get through, there are even collectibles. You get to change Simon's hoodies to add a little customization to your player, as well as various other things like unlockable game types, the FAMAS rifle, an axe that the Afraid of Monsters protagonist used, and even book pages that tell you how to unlock these things. The game has 4 difficulty modes in case you wanted more of a challenge, a co-op campaign, custom campaigns, many of which that you can download to your client that were made by the community, and it even comes with a few of them at the start, one of which was made by the dev team, which is really just one big reference. Beyond this, I think I've touched base with everything, so let's continue. Now we're on to my favorite part of the sit-down. The music is phenomenal. I'm just gonna open with that. The music is absolutely fucking astonishing. There is an interesting divide, though, as is the nature of everything in this game, and by that I mean the music follows 2 general themes, one of which is a very somber and relaxing tone. There is a preference to stringed instruments, typically the guitar and bass or piano as the foreground of the piece. These pieces further drive the feeling of loneliness and leave a sad look on your face upon hearing this style. The other is the horror aspect. Cry of Fear likes its very bassy and muddy-sounding ambiance that makes you constantly look over your fucking shoulder, that constant unsettling feeling of the world around you. It makes the horror all that more successful, if you ask me. While I love the horror tracks in this game, the strength definitely lies in the choice of tracks used in key cutscenes, I would have to say. The track called Crow, for example, fits the mood perfectly. While it is depressing, yes, it leaves you in more thoughts, and still to this day, I will get upset when I get to this game and come across that cutscene. Y'all sexy motherfuckers who played the game know exactly what scene I'm talking about. I haven't actually seen the bad endings of the game yet, mostly because I'm too empathetic for my own good, and I will literally need to go outside and cry in the rain if I do, but I do know about the tracks that it plays on these bad endings, and they are very powerful. For those of you who don't know, Simon can actually kill himself if you make the wrong choices. So if you're like me and you don't deal very well with suicide in video games, then there's your warning. The interesting thing about the music as well is that none of the tracks are particularly intricate. I mean, that's not to shit on the artist, I'm just saying that they're pretty simple pieces. With a little bit of practice, I can probably learn most of these instrumental pieces in a day, flat. I wouldn't have them down perfectly, but I could replicate it. And a lot of those same pieces tend to have background ambiance as well, though, like wind or rain or some equivalent. So I might actually have more trouble with that shit. Just saying. Once again, I love the artists of this, I'm not shitting on their style. Now on to our pros and cons section, people. So we're going to start with the pros just because that's the word that happens to come first when I say them together. So, first off, obviously, the music is good and fitting. We already just went over that maybe 30 seconds ago, though, but it's not overly, intricate, as I was saying earlier, but it definitely fits the game and gets the ambiance really going and makes things that much more, I guess, interesting for the play. It just makes everything more immersive. The second pro would have to be, clearly, the amount of content in the game. Especially for a free game, there's just tons of replay value in this game. There's so many things to do, and I can still go through the base campaign on normal if I wanted to and try to, get all of the different things that I need to get throughout the game as well, because the way the collectibles work. So there's just a lot of shit in this game. It's actually a really good horror story as well, and a very great take on insanity. I was actually really surprised with how well done the story was on this game, and I really, really enjoyed it. The next one would have to be that it's a solid horror game, going on the actual elements put together on how scary that it is. It is actually pretty creepy and scary, this game, despite everything that it is, and that it is pretty old compared to today's standards. It actually shit me up 3 years ago pretty badly at a couple of particular parts. So, those of you who aren't completely unaffected by horror, I think there's a good chance that this game will shit you up from time to time. And then finally, of course, the game's completely free, so you literally have nothing to lose by at least trying the game to see if it pulls you in. So I would implore that if it seems interesting to you, you might as well try it. You might really like the game. And then we have to move over to the cons section, blah-de-blah-blah-blah, so, I have to be impartial here, though, in all seriousness. The game is clunky as hell. It is clunky. You get stuck on everything. The stamina bar does not help in this game, though it is intentional, both of those I'm sure. It just makes things very, very hard to be able to maneuver. No horror game, period, do you want to backpedal in and then get stuck on every polygon behind you while you're trying to backpedal and take unnecessary damage, especially in the harder difficulties. It got so bad to a point where I was actually starting to rage in my playthrough because of that shit. Getting caught on corners, on enemies, on fucking everything. And it just sucks. So, the second con is that it is indeed a buggy game. It's not super over-the-top game-breakingly buggy, but there will be bugs to deal with, particularly with loading the game for some reason. I don't know what it is with that shit. Sometimes you can load under the floors, sometimes you load into a completely white screen where things are duplicating like crazy. It's like the game is rendering itself 900 times or some shit, and you have 2 frames when you're loading the game through that shit. Tabbing out can be an absolute goddamn fucking nightmare sometimes. When you click in, it might move the window, it might do a random thing. It's like Pandora's box, essentially, when you click back into the game, and there's no greater way to explain it. Or actually, better yet, it's like the Wabbajack from Skyrim, where sometimes you might just get a really powerful spell, and other times you're just gonna turn a guard into a fucking sweet roll. I mean, you never really know. Enemies do weird shit, sound clips can do other things. Like, this is just to name a couple of things that I can think of off the top of my head for bugs, so... And then lastly, for cons, believe it or not, I'm still putting it in as a con, is the game can be pretty difficult, even on the normal difficulty, so... If you're not into trying pretty hard, and you don't even need to try that hard to succeed. I'm not saying that you need to, like, really fucking dedicate into the game, but if you want a casual horror game that you can just breeze through, I can't say that this game is one of them, though I haven't tried the easiest difficulty mode, so I'm not 100% sure on that one, but it does seem more difficult than most horror games. I will leave it at that. And now here we are, folks. It's time to wrap everything up. Cry of Fear was an excellent experience. Not just an experience, but it was an excellent game. A game with a lot of tender love, care, and some seriously fucked up elements that are not meant for the faint of heart. But it was an overly positive gameplay experience for me, as the Steam reviews are reflecting about it right here. This game is the example I give to people when I use a price point to content comparison. It literally is. When I say I don't feel like I'll get my money's worth out of something, I immediately follow up with, Cry of Fear gives me twice as much to do in this game, and that's fucking free! Yeah! All jokes aside, though, it was well done. The story was great, the gameplay was great, the mechanics were great, and although the game is a bit buggy and some things don't work for everyone, it was a rock-solid experience. Like my abs. I'm just kidding, I'm 6'5" and about 155 pounds. A fucking toddler has more muscle mass than I do. Would I recommend this game to people? Absolutely. If you enjoy horror games, especially indie titles, then it's something you should definitely take a look at. If you like shooters that have decent and fairly realistic gun handling, you might like this game. If you enjoy something that you can feel the dev team is actually proud of and truly were very passionate about, then this game might be for you. That being said, if you have a zero bullshit policy for bugs or you get easily annoyed with getting stuck in the environment, then you might have a bad time. If you hate horror or first-person shooter games, then you probably won't like it. I'd still implore the people who don't like the shortcomings and bugs to at least try it. I found that some of the best diamonds I found in life were simply a zircon in disguise. That's a gem crafter idiom because zircons look exactly like diamonds. Look, fuck you if you didn't get it. I'm saying try the fucking game, damn it. If you like this video, please let me know about it. It would be super neat if you could tell me specifically what I did well. If you're on the opposite end of the fence, then tell me what I can do to improve. Feedback is always appreciated. Just try not to be a dick about it. Be constructive. As you can imagine, throw a like if you so choose. If not, then fuck it, I tried. Follow me for more shit like this down the line. I have another one of these silent sit-downs planned for the game Underhell next. I have a Discord as well if anybody wants to jump in with the microscopic community that I have. And on that note, take it easy, everyone. I will see you later. And I love every single one of you. Mwah.